Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Today I want to talk about the Soradin. So this is a multi-class of Paladin and Sorcerer that it's been a popular build since pretty much the start of 5th edition. The general idea is that by taking 6 levels of Paladin, you've basically gotten most of what the class has to offer. I mean, you have spell casting roughly equivalent to a 3rd level full caster. You have extra attack, you have armor and weapon proficiencies, you have smite, you have some healing ability. You have the ability to remove diseases and neutralize poisons. You have a fighting style. You have a channel divinity. And perhaps most dramatically, you have the Aura of Protection. That's arguably more in the first 6 levels than 14 more levels in this class provides. Depending on your subclass, one more level to get the 7th level subclass feature may or may not be worth it. Otherwise, it's just a really good time to consider that multi-class switch. And when it comes to multi-class options, full casting classes make a lot of sense because of the synergy with the Paladin's ability to smite, the general power of spells overall, and because the features of martial classes are going to end up being at least partially redundant if we multi-class that direction. Though we should now talk about what we want out of our character, conceptually. There are multiple ways you can go with a Soradin. First, you could just be a smite machine. So we enter combat, and every time we hit, we smite for extra damage until the spell slots are gone. The point here is that by going with a full casting class once we leave Paladin, we can increase spell slot progression, which means more and higher level smites. So if we want to go this route, then multi-classing into a full caster makes all kinds of sense. Now, I'm not saying the smite machine never casts spells, but at least most of their spell slots are going to be going into smites. Second, we could go for more the arcane warrior. Often we call this a gish, where we mix weapon use with spell casting. In this case, we definitely don't want to be too smite happy so that we can use our spell slots, let's be crazy here, for spells. Not saying the Gish will never smite, but if we're shifting our focus here so that we're a little bit more spell casting and kind of mixing the weapon use and spell casting, the spell slots need to be primarily for spell casting, and we can throw in occasional smite attacks. The third option is we could choose not to play a melee character at all. Maybe we use a hand crossbow. Or maybe we're just going to be kind of a low-grade sorcerer after we multi-class out with Aura Protection. Or maybe we're just dodging the rest of the time, so we're basically a boosting platform. I've heard, this is something I've actually heard, is the correct way to play this style of characters to cast Bless on round 1, and then you just dodge and stay close to the other characters, particularly the ranged characters like archers and spellcasters, and the rest doesn't matter that much. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in addition to sounding really boring, I'm not sure boosting saving throws is really an effective role for an entire character in the party, but I'm giving optimization advice here. So if that is the character that sounds fun to you, then of course that's what you should play. Just be aware the rest of this video might not be for you, because for me, melee is the play here. Now, whether you want to go with a smite machine or more of a gish, in reality, this isn't a question we need to answer when we build our character. We can actually make these decisions during gameplay. We can even switch from session to session. I'll talk about more when I think is the optimal time to smite later in this video. I think there's a lot more nuance than the answers I sometimes hear, like, you should not smite, or you should smite when you get a critical hit. We're going to circle back to this, but I think there's more to it. Okay, so we multi-class out of Paladin. What class do we multi-class to? I mean, we know the answer is Sorcerer, since this is a Soradin video. But why? Bard and Sorcerer stick out because their spellcasting, unlike Warlock, combines with the Paladin's spell slot progression, leading to higher level slots. Other casting classes like Cleric, Druid, Wizard, they just aren't really possible to multi-class into because we need strength and charisma, and we just can't afford a strong wisdom or intelligence. Speaking of not being able to afford, it might be tempting to think that we should take a level of Sorcerer first to get Constitution saving throw proficiency. I really don't think this pays off because of the way the multiclass rules work, you're not going to get heavy armor proficiency, and we desperately want heavy armor proficiency. Medium armor proficiency means we need a decent dexterity, and speaking of not being able to afford, we can't afford a decent dexterity either, so medium armor isn't going to work for us, so we really have to go Paladin first. But once we leave Paladin, when it comes to picking between Bard and Sorcerer, there's really two factors. The first is, from which class does the spell list that better complements what we can do come from? And the second is whether metamagic or inspiration works better with our features. The reality is actually both work pretty well. Bard Paladin is a strong multi-class option. But when it comes to pushing out more attacks and better defense and better mobility, which the Paladin is really looking for, the Sorcerer spells and metamagic, they just really fit. So, first off, I want to look at Paladin. Is 6 levels ideal? Well, one theory is we should only take 2 levels of Paladin. I guess the idea is we get smite, right? That's the main point of the second level. Now, I could potentially see this as a 2-level dip on something like a 6-level Swords Bard or a Valor Bard maybe. But on a Sorcerer, I think this isn't strong at all. I mean, the first level for armor, I get that. But if you're doing 1 level of Paladin, you might as well just do 1 level Fighter. Or even better, if you can get some kind of full casting class that has armor proficiency on it, like Cleric. Adding a 2nd level of Paladin doesn't hurt our spell slot progression, but it really hurts our spell level progression. The main problem is, if you're itching for smite, then you really want extra attack. Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade, they just don't equal extra attack, especially if we're hoping for maximizing our smite damage. Sorry, I just don't see a Sorcerer with 2 levels of Paladin as a particularly effective Soradin build. The second option is to multi-class out of Paladin at level 6. Aura Protection is really, really good. And frankly, if you're taking Paladin at all, it's really hard not to go for 6 levels and get the flagship feature of the class. This provides all the features I previously mentioned. Now, 6 levels is a really big investment, so just be aware this character is never going to be a really strong caster, because you're not just 3 levels behind in spell slot progression, but you're 6 levels behind in spell level progression. So when the other full casters are getting Bigby's Hand or Wall of Stone or Wall of Force, you're getting Misty Step. So if we invest 6 levels, how big a sacrifice is 1 more level? So 7th level gets talked about a lot as a jumping point for Soradin builds. This is because we get a subclass feature at this level, which, depending on our subclass, can be really good. In this case, I would say the value depends heavily on your subclass. So which subclasses want to consider 7th level? Well, if we're really focusing on frightening enemies, that 7th level Conquest feature is really good. The Devotion Charm immunity can be really useful, and parties can plan around it, right? So they lob hypnotic patterns without concern of friendly fire. Watchers is probably the standout. Initiative boosts are really useful, and we can boost not only our own initiative, but party members within 10 feet of us as well. The downsides of the 7th level are significant though. It's just 1 more level, but once we multi-class, we're having our level rounded down to determine spellcasting progression. So we actually lose out on a whole level of spellcasting from our Paladin side. Never mind, we're putting everything Sorcerer based a level back. It hurts for ability score increases as well. We have 1 feat, and now we're going to be level 11 before we get our 2nd feat. And spoiler, when you want to be good at weapon use and spellcasting, you're going to find you just can't focus on both, because the variety of feats for both that you are going to want. Lots of builds are feat hungry, but Soradins, well, they're feat starved. So the next option is we go another level. So we go 8 Paladin. Then we get our 2nd ability score increase. We get our 7th level subclass feature. in addition to all the goodies before that, and it divides evenly, so we get an even 4 levels of multi-class spell slot progression. The downside, I think it should be pretty clear by this point, we're now going up to level 8. I mean, if the campaign is going to high level, you may still have enough time to get some reasonable levels of Sorcerer on there. But if you aren't, then you're not really a Soradin. I mean, you're more a Paladin with maybe a Sorcerer dip. I mean, you get 3rd level spells when you reach level 13. Eldritch Knights and Arcane Tricksters are getting 3rd level spells at level 13, and they're barely spellcasters. Now, we have more slots and higher level slots, but if you want to Thunderstep or Fly or use Spirit Shroud or any of the Gishy kinds of things you would expect from a Gish character, we're pretty far in to get those for the first time. Not that 8 levels is a bad jump point. It's perfectly reasonable, but really we're not so much a Soradin as a Paladin, which is fine. Paladins are good, but if we want to make a Soradin, that might not be what we're going for. But yeah, I think 6, 7, or 8, those are really the optimal jump points. I think in most cases, though, I would be looking at 6, because it's just getting the Soradin thing happening, and we want to get it happening as early as possible. The Soradin is never going to be competing with full spellcasters for casting, but that's not what we're going to be going for. We're going to go for a bit of melee, a bit of spellcasting, and a bit of protection on a single platform. So we're going to have to be a bit of a jack of all trades. We're not going to be an expert at any of them, but between the lot of them, we've got an effective mix. So we're going to go Paladin, we're going to take 6 levels, then we're going to multi-class into Sorcerer. What subclasses should we take? So Paladin subclasses, let's just assume we're leaving at level 6. Well, then there's really only 2 factors that are relevant at all. The first is, how can we use our Channel Divinity? Now, every Paladin can use their Channel Divinity to harness divine power and get a spell slot back. So they all have a decent option, but some have decent other options. The other is what spells are on their spell list. And we're only looking at the low-level spells. 1st and 2nd level spells is all we care about because we're not going to be accessing any of the higher-level spells. That's not a big list of things, and it's not nearly the most powerful things that our Paladin at 6th level is going to have access to. But what I'm saying is, yeah, they aren't completely equal, but there's no right or wrong option here. If you're focusing on the Channel Divinity, you can't see the forest for the trees. Pick the Paladin subclass that works for your concept, and your choice is going to be fine. Spells, smites, fighting style, armor, weapons, protection aura, you get all the best goodies regardless of your subclass selection. Okay, so I think we can be a bit more discerning though when we talk about our Sorcerer subclass. I think any Sorcerer subclass works okay, so if you really have this concept where your character is edgy and shadow magic fits your theme, then go ahead and do it. It's not a bad option, but your spells known are going to be pretty limited. I think when it comes to the Sorcerer subclass, there are 3 obvious choices. The first is Divine Soul. This is what I would call Soradin Classic. You know what you want your melee character to have? Spirit Guardians. Great spell, lasts a good amount of time, no friendly fire, damages enemies every round, and often more than one. The damage type is as reliable as it gets. Favorite of the Gods is a good feature, and you get it at level 1. And that's pretty much the whole thing. Access to Bless, Cleric spells. I mean, we have access to a lot of them already through our Paladin spellcasting. This is all about Spirit Guardians. If I'm taking Divine Soul, it's I want Spirit Guardians on my Soradin. That's why you take it. The second one I would consider is Aberrant Mind. This one's a mix. We get more spells known, and at 6th level we get some really good subclass features. Psionic Sorcery is great, and Psychic Defenses is actually pretty good too. We're leaning more into spell versatility here with some nice subclass features. The third I'd consider is Clockwork Soul. Here we're totally leaning into spell versatility. Like Aberrant Mind, we're getting extra spells known, and in both cases, it's like twice as many spells known. With Clockwork, the subclass features aren't as flashy as they are with Aberrant Mind, but the extra spells known It's really stellar list of options from 3 different spell lists. If you want the most spells known as well as the best spells known, Clockwork is the answer. So all 3 of these subclasses I think are strong choices. It really depends on your taste, but the amount of levels that they require to get the best things out of them do come into play. I think if you're talking about the first level, Divine Soul looks really good. And the best stuff for Aberrant Mind actually doesn't come till level 6. So that's 12th level for a character. But really, any of these 3 good options. So let's move on and we'll talk about ability scores. This one, we're going to get into some tough stuff here. So first off, Charisma has to be our #1 primary ability score. Now I know you want to be a hard hitter, but Charisma isn't just our casting ability, it's also our saving throw aura bonus. I think Charisma really needs to be 16 right at level 1. And with Tasha's out, we can alter ability scores, put them where we want. There's just no need to have a Charisma lower than 16. Now, I need to mention Hexblade here, because you're thinking it. I can take a Hexblade dip, and then I can just concentrate on Charisma. So, yeah, if you want to, you could take a level of Hexblade, and then you can use your sword or your axe or whatever, and you can use Charisma. But not a two-handed weapon, unless we take 3 levels of Warlock. And I don't know if you noticed, but we're already throwing a lot of levels around. And on that topic, I'm actually not a huge fan of the Hex Dip here. I will explain why a little bit more. I want to go over the rest of the ability scores. I don't think Hexblade is necessarily the right move here. I realize why it's obvious. I'm going to explain it's not necessarily going to do what you think it is. But first, let's talk about our second stat, because if we're not going to go Hexblade, it needs to be something we can use a weapon with. So that means Dexterity or Strength. And, we know the answer here. Now, Dexterity has a lot of advantages over Strength. I mean, it adds to our initiative. It's a more common saving throw. It would allow us to wear medium armor, so then maybe we could do that Sorcerer dip first before we go Paladin. But it just doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because of the multiclass requirements. In order to multiclass out of Paladin, we need to have a strength of 13, and we just can't fit a strength of 13 and then maximize our dexterity and our charisma and give us an appropriate constitution score. There's just no way to do it. So what should our starting strength be? Well, it should also be a minimum of 16 to start. And so here's where I point out that Hexblade allows us to ease off that strength score. We need a 13 minimum regardless in order to multiclass in the first place, but where are those extra points going? Because we've already maxed out our charisma, so we're not putting it there. I guess constitution, so we could get a 16 instead of a 14. A difference of 1 hit point per level and 1 saving throw boosted by 1. That's not nothing, but we're devoting an entire level for that. Assuming we're taking Hexblade early, and we kind of need to if that's the way we're going to go, we're holding back spell progression, the aura, extra attack, Sorcerer, our ability score increases. Now I get it. Eventually we're going to raise our charisma, and then we're going to get more from it. But guess what? We now need to talk about ability score increases. Because feats and ability score increases, this hurts. I mean, it really hurts if you are playing a Soradin. We want that charisma up. We want to hit hard. We want to be able to cast with our hands full. We want to hold our concentration. Well, tough. It ain't happening. There's no way around it. Because we get our first ability score increase at level 4, and our second ability score increase at level 10. That might be it for the entire campaign. So that's 2, and we can increase that to 3 if we go variant human or custom lineage. So what should those 3 ability score increases be? I mean, we definitely want Warcaster. I mean, if we're going to go Gish, this is kind of a no-brainer. Opportunity attacks replaced by spells, casting with our hands full, advantage on most of our concentration saving throws. This one pretty much needs to be top of the list. Then, I want so bad to have Great Weapon Master, Sentinel, and Polar Master. Or even 2 of those 3. But I do not have the feats. Maybe we can afford one of them. And you know what that means? If we get a bonus feat at level 1, the earliest we're raising our charisma is level 10. So levels 1 through 9, we're basically stuck at +3 charisma bonus. So let's go back and talk about Hexblade again. If we grab that Hexblade dip, we're not increasing our charisma now until level 11. So I can tell you why I would initially think that Hexblade is just an obvious dip for any paladin. And that is because I want to have a high charisma, and then I can just focus on charisma. Because if with Hex Weapon, I can use my charisma bonus for my weapon attacks. And that sounds really amazing. Except the reality is, since we're probably looking at a +3 charisma bonus, and we're probably looking at a +3 strength bonus, being able to use charisma instead of strength doesn't give us a higher bonus. We can put that strength elsewhere, so we can lower the strength to 13, and then, but we're not boosting our charisma with those points because we already have as high as we can get. So we're putting it in dexterity or constitution, which is okay, but we're not getting what we initially think we're getting, which is better weapon attacks. In fact, we're actually getting worse weapon attacks because we're putting smite behind. We're putting extra attack behind. So the things that are kind of boosting our offense through Paladin are all getting access later because we took Hexblade, and we're not getting the weapon bonus that we thought we were. Now, eventually, at super high levels, you will. Eventually, we are going to increase our charisma. But if we want Warcaster, if we want to have weapon feats, it's not happening till level 11 at the earliest. Now, one place where I do think a Hex dip works better is if we go custom lineage, we can actually start with an 18 charisma. So the idea is you take your bonus feat and you can take something like Fey Touched or Telekinetic, something that boosts your charisma, then you can start with an 18. So then you get that right off the bat. So you have +4 to hit, +4 damage. Never mind the other benefits that charisma gives us, which are substantial. The issue is, though, that basically that bonus feat that custom lineage is getting is now spoken for. So we're not taking Warcaster at level 1 or weapon feats. In fact, we're not getting them any earlier than any race that doesn't get a bonus feat would get. And we are getting them later than a variant human could get it. So if we played variant human, we just played straight Soradin, we didn't worry about Hexblade, we're going to get those feats faster than we would with custom lineage, and we're not seeing any negatives in terms of our weapon attacks. So yeah, I mean, it's a couple more hit points. Hexblade Curse is good, and we're getting that spell slot. So I don't think it's a bad dip, but I don't think it's giving us what we think it's giving us. And that's why I don't think a Soradin necessarily should take a Hexblade dip. One thing I can say for sure about ability score increases, though, is you have no room for playing around. You want to be an inspiring leader, maybe you should just be playing a Sorcerer. You just can't fit it on a Soradin build. Okay, so let's discuss our race options. Now, we just had a big talk about how many feats we need. Variant Human is a really easy option here. You can start with 16 Strength, 14 Constitution, and 16 Charisma. And most importantly, we're a feat ahead. I mean, if we don't go Variant Human, put all those feats I discussed earlier 4 levels back. And we're not raising our Charisma now until level 14. Now, the other obvious thought is Custom Lineage, because they also get a bonus feat, but they actually have a problem here. We only have one ability score boost, and we can't prioritize Charisma and Strength right off the bat. So what we really need to do then is focus entirely on Charisma and take that Hexblade dip, which means Warcaster, weapon feats, they all get pushed back as if we didn't have the bonus feat. Now, what about other racial options? Because, there are other options that aren't bad, but just be aware that whatever race you choose, if it doesn't get that bonus feat at level 1, you are going to have that slowed feat acquisition. So you're just going to have to weigh that. But, I have to mention concentration-free flight. So being able to fly without using your concentration, especially if you're a melee character, is just huge. Now, we can access the fly spell, but that's going to use our concentration. There are a number of races that allow concentration-free flight. the problem with most of them is you can't wear heavy armor, and we need to wear heavy armor. There are some races, though, that have limited use concentration-free flight, and they don't have that restriction. I'm specifically talking about the Protection Azamar and the Gem Dragonborn. Yuan Ti is actually strong here. Now, I know Yuan Ti got nerfed a bit in Monsters of the Multiverse, but even after the nerf, we're still getting magic resistance, poison resistance, some charisma-based spellcasting. There's still a lot there. Other racial features that stand out to me, the Tabaxi's feline agility, always great on a melee character. Depending on your feat selection, races that have bonus action built in can be good, like Minotaurs or Goblins. The Bugbear's built-in reach can be effective on some builds. Herringon will offset the low dexterity on initiative rolls. I mean, these are all good, but you know what? If I'm going to be honest, probably the Variant Human for that feat and for the 2 ability score bonuses. I don't think it's the only option, but it is top of the pyramid in my opinion. So I want to finish off this video talking about when we should smite. Popular online advice is to smite when you roll a critical hit. Honestly, I think there are some other times we'll want to smite, and frankly, we don't necessarily want to smite on every critical. So here is when I'm going to use smite. First, if I believe it is going to be the difference between reducing a creature to 0 hit points or not reducing them to 0 hit points. Now, I don't know exactly what enemy hit points are, so there's guesswork here, but sometimes I get the feeling in combat, right, as to approximately how many hit points enemies have, and what we can do then is we can look at our weapon attack and go, okay, that's not going to be enough for sure. If I add another 2d8, there's a reasonable chance it will be enough. Well, that's maybe worth a spell slot. Taking an enemy out of the fight so that they're not going to get their turn afterwards, we're not going to need to use another action to take them down, that can be worth a first level slot. So yeah, if I think it is likely to reduce a creature to 0 hit points, and I don't think my weapon attack on its own is going to reduce a creature to 0 hit points, then I'm going to use a smite. Number 2, okay, so critical hits. Here's when I want to use a smite on a critical hit. So if we critical, we get double the smite. So if we're going to use a first level smite, we would get 4d8 instead of 2d8. So when do we want to smite on a critical hit? Well, just like I said before, if I think it's the difference that's going to get the monster to 0 hit points, absolutely, definitely want to do it. If I think this enemy is the significant enemy, so this is the big, bad, tough thing, we want to get it down as soon as possible, inflicting a lot of damage through a smite, it helps with that, right? Damage solves problems. But you know when I don't want to use a smite? If it's not maybe the most significant enemy, and frankly, I don't know whether it's the difference between taking them down or not, or I might even take them down without using the smite, then I don't want to be adding a smite. Right? What would be more disappointing than, you make your attack, you hit, you roll your damage, you say, I'm going to add a smite, and you add your smite, and you find out that you didn't need the smite, right? Then you just gave up a spell slot for nothing. So when I see that critical hit, I think a little bit about it. I often smite on a critical hit, but not always. Okay, so the third time I would be using smites is when I don't need to conserve spell slots. Because this happens. Sometimes you're going through a dungeon and you're doing encounter after encounter after encounter. Well, you don't have spell slots to spare. But if, say, you're traveling and then the DM says, oh, you had an encounter on day 3 and it's a combat encounter and here we go. Well, I've got 1 combat. What am I saving the spell slots for? I might as well smite, right? So in that case, I'm going to smite. Probably do some spell casting, but the rest of those slots, might as well use them, and I can get some value out of them by converting them into smites. Fourth time I'd consider smiting. If I am facing weapon damage immunity, or potentially even resistance to the weapon damage. So this is more of a low-level problem than a high-level problem, but we can face something like, let's say we come up against some were-rats, and suddenly my weapon doesn't do any damage. Now we need to kill them, so I need to inflict damage. So how am I going to do it? Well, if I hit and I inflict a smite, I can do some damage. So yeah, I would consider smiting in those situations. And the final time I'd use smite is if I'm in a situation that is desperate. So if we're in a campaign where the DM gives us appropriate challenges, usually we're not desperate. Usually, if we work together well and the challenge is reasonable for our level, we should have to expend some resources, of course, but we should be able to defeat the challenge. But you know what? It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes there's certain features or traits of enemies that the DM didn't really think about how well they would counter what the players can do. Sometimes it's just a case of bad rolls, right? So the players roll bad, and so they're not delivering the damage they normally deliver. They're not getting the control they're normally delivering. Maybe the enemies are just getting really lucky on their saving throws. Sometimes it's a matter of some tactical mistakes. Maybe we're just not working together as well today as we usually do. But one way or the other, sometimes battles are going to go against you and things get desperate. Well, in those cases, you got to do everything you can. And that's when I stop thinking about conservation. I'm going to use every tool at my disposal to try to squeak out a win here, to try to make this happen without any characters dying. And in those cases, am I going to smite? Absolutely. Okay, so that is my guide for Soradin. I am going to be doing a build in the next video. Hope you'll join me for that. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.